Patch 6.9 notes review. This is the very large patch, so in an effort to cut down on the time, I'm going to gloss over some of these changes. Basically, every champion you see here, Vladimir, Malzahar, Cassiopeia, Zyra, Brand, and Vel'Koz have some pretty decent sized reworks attached to them. For individual details, you're just going to have to look them up. Just based on what I'm seeing on the numbers, it looks like Brand is going to be a really big pick. Malzahar is yet unseen as to what the effects are going to be. Vladimir seems a little bit weaker, but better with tankier builds. The main change is his passive. You're not going to get as much health for going straight AP, so it'll probably make Rylai's a core item for him now. Malzahar changes seem like he'll be closer to a jungler. I don't think he'll be that good in lane anymore. Maybe. And the rest of the changes I'm not really that familiar with, so I don't want to say anything. Because with these kind of changes, I can kind of tell what the kit's going to be like. But these four, a little bit harder to tell. Just based off the numbers, we'll have to see how they do in game. And then they have like 10 more mage changes, so that is 16 mages being changed. Or there are 16 mages being changed. It's pretty huge. And out of these 10 minor changes, I think they're just basically trying to remove things that are frustrating to play against. In like not so many words, I would say most of these champions got like small nerfs, and I would expect most of these to be buffs. But the overall power level of mages seems to have been a little bit lower than some of their use cases before. Functionally, it seems like Swain's Q is no longer targeted. You can't target it on the enemy champion. It's like gonna base on an AoE, and then it will prioritize whoever you have tormented. There's like there's so many changes packed into each champion change. It's hard to even get through one champion and not mess something up when I'm trying to explain it. It's like just because I can understand it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be obvious. One of the things that I did understand through the notes was that Kennen's ultimate will be probably a lot stronger. Passive got like a slight nerf. Uh, it just seems like Kennen will probably be about the same as before. As much as I hate to say that because I like the champion. But the ultimate will also deal damage to neutral monsters and minions, so that'll actually make it worth to ult Baron if you're going in for like the 1v5 solo. And I'm trying to spend a little bit of time in this section just because the way they have the notes organized, there's actually like probably like 10 pages of notes to go through. So they made everything nice and legible. Just think of most of these changes as like quality of life fixes. Ziggs is going to be another pretty big buff. I'm actually surprised that they're calling this a minor mage change. Maybe so that they could make their template nice and pretty. with 6 and 10 instead of 7 and 9, which is understandable, but I would actually call this like major update. W satchel charge can now be used on turrets below 25% up to like 35% at max rank. So this is based on the level of your W. But then lower down in the changes, there's turrets, which turrets have gotten like completely changed around. So at the end of the day, the value of this is really high because you're always looking to kill the inhibitor. It's not so much the tower as you want access to the inhibitor that's behind it. So overloading the ability to insta-gib towers from almost 50%. Just think, if a tower is half health and the AD carry autos it 2 times, then it's probably closer to 35%. Since towers are going to be tankier in general, it's just seems like AD carries won't be as prevalent. All these changes, the grand scope of things is kind of to remove 3 AD carry compositions that they've been seeing in competitive and that kind of thing, just because there was no downside to running it. Another interesting change is the passive for Fiddlesticks. He's going to get like these little short bursts of movement speed after not moving. So, for instance, after you're ulting, might actually stack incredibly well with Storm Raider Surge. We'll have to see how that works out. But Terrify range got nerfed. 50 range, it's not very big, but you'll definitely feel the difference. Closer to 500 instead of being closer to 600. And this cooldown is like functionally pretty close to the same thing. For max drain cooldown, what this change is actually going to be mainly is if you get off only a partial channel of your drain, then it'll be off cooldown much sooner than it would have been before. Because the cooldown starts at the end of the drain's channel, instead of having an artificially large cooldown from it starting when you start channeling. So that's what that change does. Darkwind now prioritizes drain targets and can bounce up to 7 times, so that's going to increase the damage. They didn't say that they lowered the damage, so that's a pretty big buff on damage right there. And another thing that's going to be probably messing with experienced Fiddlesticks players is that it'll now cast at maximum range if cast out of range. If you're an experienced player, this will probably not help you. This will probably actually hurt you. You might actually accidentally cast it when you're trying to position over a wall where you have good muscle memory for where to click. But this will help noob players, which seems to be what they go for when they make changes nowadays. Annie got some like buffs on her Molten Shield, so it's gonna feel more like a real ability instead of just a stack generator. Passive is now displayed under her health bar, so it's kind of like Jhin. Like a lot of these changes, they're not major changes to the champions. They're just like quality of life and usability changes. Tibbers has got some interesting changes. Some things about health regen. I'm not really going to go into it too much though, in an effort to keep this down in length. Cinder just seems like she's getting straight buffed, which is fine. She probably needed a little bit of help, but it's still frustrating when she just one shots you. That playstyle will still be here. Veigar is another one of the huge changes, like in terms of usability. His burst is going to be lower against squishy champions, I want to say, unless they're missing a decent amount of their health. But this is to stop Veigar from one-shotting someone, no matter what order he combos them in. What they did is they like made it so it has a lower AP ratio depending on how much health they have. So if they have a lot of missing health, then it'll do more damage. The ratio goes up to 1.5 ability power. And they've got nice damage values for the base damage as well. So they base that on missing health. Let's see if I missed anything up here that's especially interesting. They're kind of making Cassio into like more of an old Vladimir feel. And it's kind of weird that she can't purchase boots now. Even though there's like a lot of large scale changes in here, I want to say that this is actually more of like minor changes. What we have to remember is that you can't just look at the changes and be like, oh, okay, so one thing is said, so another thing must be true because of that. It's like you have to also account for the items that are changing, the objectives are changing, buff durations, and we'll get into all that here in a second. Another interesting change is Vel'Koz is having true damage on his ultimate beam now. So penetration builds will be like still pretty good. It won't be necessary, and you'll actually lose damage for the penetration costs. In terms of his passive and his ultimate ray, but the other damage portions will still matter. There's still 3 other procs in there. So magic penetration will probably be about the same on him. Maybe you won't feel the loss of penetration as much if you were to go an item like Riley's Crystal Scepter in order to help you get like better slow off on them than your Q. So the straight AP will probably be pretty decent. It just opens up build options to Vel'Koz when he seemed to be like pretty much tied to Liandry's and his special little 3-item build that he does. Zyra changes I'm not really gonna speculate on, because I don't have a good understanding of what they're gonna do. Now on the itemization, uh, to paraphrase like some of their forward, basically it's just they're taking mana regeneration away from items and they're just giving all the items that previously had mana regeneration either sustain or straight mana or both. So Catalyst is a little bit different now. 15% of damage taken from champions is gained as mana. Spending mana restores 20% of the mana spent as health, up to 15 per cast. Toggle spells heal for up to 15 per second. So that'll probably be pretty big for Anivia's ultimate if she still goes Rod of Ages. This is still a component of Rod of Ages, which also got some pretty decent changes. Chalice is seeming like a really OP laning item. This used to be really heavily picked up on 80 Pantheon mid, so you might see Pantheon with Chalice, and he's out sustaining you, and you don't understand why. If he's got Corrupting Pot and Chalice of Harmony, he's got like never-ending supplies of health and mana. So that's pretty much why you're getting dicked on in lane if you see that. The passive on Chalice of Harmony works off of whichever one you're missing more of, you'll start regenerating that. So, pretty useful item. And you might see a lot of people pick this item up in mid game and then sell it just because it's so cheap and it's so much sustain. Merlinomicon is getting a big buff, but it's too far down on the list for me to go over now. Lost Chapter is just a component that's got a decent amount of mana and ability power, and you're going to see that in a couple of different build paths. The reasoning for them changing Fiendish Codex here is like it had like a really low combine cost of 365 gold. It just felt really awkward. Well, the Ancients is removed and Spellvamp items are gone. You'll see later that Hextech items all share a cooldown, so Gunblade is basically the only thing that's like any form of Spellvamp. Gunblade and Rageblade together might be a good build now, because of Sated Devourer's old proc effect is now on Rageblade. When you hit max stacks, it's a max of 6 stacks instead of 8, and melee no longer triggers 2 stacks per auto. So I know Gunblade isn't on the screen, but that could be a pretty big combo, and I'll go over that more in a second. Again, I'm struggling to keep on topic with everything I want to talk about. Rod of Ages is cheaper, so this will probably be a big pickup on Maokai again for top lane. He's not going to feel the 20 ability power and 100 mana loss as much. And the big thing for him is 15% of damage taken from champions is gained as mana. So basically the same passive as Catalyst is retained on Rod of Ages. And that's actually pretty huge for the sustain tank. He's going to have enough mana to keep up his ability rotations. He's going to have a decent amount of extra damage from that 60 ability power. And yeah, it'll amplify the value of his passive. He'll get more passive procs off. He'll live for longer, etc., etc. Unless he's up against someone who's got Merlinomicon, which is probably the most buffed item in this patch in terms of AP itemization. Went from 2400 to 2900 gold, but not without good reason. It's getting 20 more ability power for that 500 gold, which is pretty huge. 400 extra mana. No mana regeneration, so that's where the gold value for all that stuff is coming from, but I still think it's a little bit overloaded. Kills and assists restore 20% of your maximum mana. And you can't build 2 of these to get 40% CDR anymore. They just made it so you can't stack. But the main thing is Grievous Wounds is being changed back to how it used to function before this patch. I'm sorry, not before this patch. Before they changed it to self-healing only, it's going to affect all healing again. So even though this is only afflicted on enemies below 35% health, down from 40% health, the effect of Grievous Wounds is much greater now. And duration is actually much longer now. So this is going to be a huge pickup, huge plays for this patch. Athene's is basically a support item now. Kind of like Karma, Sona, some champion like that. Now grants 100% base health regen for 5 seconds if your current health percentage is lower than your current mana percentage. But the main thing is 20% of pre-mitigation damage you deal to champions is gained as blood charges. So that basically means 20% of the raw value of what your spells would deal before they get mitigated is gained as blood charges. So that way you don't get less and less of an effect when you're hitting someone tanky. You'll still get pretty good blood charges no matter the target. Up to a cap of 100 to 250, levels 1 to 18. They do a lot of scaling by level now, if you didn't notice. Healing or shielding an ally consumes your current blood charges to heal that ally. This is just going to be like unseen power until people are used to how it plays out. So I think that's a pretty cool change. 2200 gold, down from 2700, but it did lose quite a bit. Losing 20 ability power for right around the same amount of gold as Morelos is getting increased. So effectively, these are about 1,000 gold apart now. Not exactly, like give or take a little bit, but you just want to check out approximate values when you're going through changes. That way you can let it all sink in. And then the obvious, not the obvious, but the very important details that aren't obvious right away, they will be easier to notice later since you're focusing on the baseline of stats early. Refunds 25% of mana spent. Refunds 15% of mana spent. That's to give you mana regeneration effects without giving you the actual mana regeneration. It's kind of a weird change, but we're gonna roll with it. So basically what they're saying here is Abyssal Scepter is making mid lane a battle of who can get the Abyssal first. And then once you had it, you're just pushing them under tower faster and easier. So as a result, the aura no longer applies to minions. The ability power is going down, but the magic is just going up. And it's also got cooldown reduction now. And the cost went up, so you're not going to rush Abyssal Scepter necessarily anymore. Consequently, this actually becomes a better item for Maokai. So Rod of Ages and Abyssal Scepter for Maokai would actually be pretty dope. And maybe even like you could go pseudo offensive build on him now. Zhonya's Hourglass is also cheaper, but the stasis cooldown is going up by 30 seconds. Basically every 2 minutes instead of every minute and a half. Which when you're getting into late game team fights, that's actually a pretty big nerf to the item, but as a result they're lowering ability power and making it more accessible. 3,500 gold for the first time you need Zhonya's was really a lot. So I like this change functionally, because if you can imagine a situation where if you had had Zhonya's earlier in the game and you cast it perfectly one time, that can win you the game. Whereas before it was like you just happen to be 6,000 gold ahead of the other mid laner in items. You can just build one of these and shit all over him because you have extra cooldowns up again. So the identity of the item will be the same. Functionally, it'll be a little bit different, but overall, I think this is a good change for Zhonya's users. Particularly, Kennen will benefit from this, and Katarina, champions like that. Hextech Revolver is kind of going to be like dealing a little bit of magic damage on hit, and it no longer grants spell vamp. I'm not even sure who you would build this on anymore, to be honest, so we'll just kind of skip that for now. This is one of the new AP items, Hextech GLP 800, whatever the hell that means. Don't ask me. It just seems like kind of a Rod of Ages that shoots people. That's how I would think of it. And this Protobelt is the one that gives you an extra gap closer. So think of this on Fizz and Annie. They're just going to have an extra gap closer earlier on in the game in order to deal damage to you. But there's quite a trade-off. There's only 60 ability power. It's 300 health, but depending on how early you get this in the game, like the more impressive it'll be. All these items do share a cooldown because of the unique name, Firebolt. Out of all these Hextech items that are new, Gunblade is the one that's been here like the whole time. I think it's going to be pretty good still. The active is new. Deals 250 magic damage to target champion, slows them for 40%. I don't know how that compares to the old Gunblade active, but this should be slightly better, especially since there's a decent amount of sustain being removed from the game. They're adding it back in other places. Elemental Dragons, I could do a completely different video on this alone. I'll just go over it really quick. Mountain Drake increases turret and epic monster damage. So think of it like this is Earth. Just think of it like spawning an extra golem to do damage to objectives for you. Like once you take out the Mountain Drake, this will help you do Baron quicker. Or it'll help you take out turrets quicker. So just like imagine there's like a little golem guy made of dirt and he's like running around hitting towers and hitting Baron for you. This like red dragon, think of it as like fire. It's going to do more damage to enemy champions. Similar to the aspect dragon buff for Dragon 5 that we're actually familiar with. It'll kind of be like another red buff. Think of it like that, except it does it slow. Eight, 16, 24% increased attack damage and ability power depending on stack level. So the Cloud Drake is the one that gives you quicker movement around the map. Just think of it as like a gust of wind. And the Ocean Drake, I think of it as a glass of water. It'll top you off on health and mana. And probably be the best for like poke / pick compositions or sieging comps in general. But then you have to think about the counterplay involved in that is that you don't want a poke composition to get this buff. And you're going to be able to tell which dragon is going to spawn next based on the minimap icon. So it won't be a surprise when it spawns. One of the changes I'm not really too fond of is that they're adding jungle timers. And jungle timers will be visible to both teams within a minute of the buff spawning, and then at 20 seconds before the buff spawns it'll get brighter and brighter. So I want to say this is a result of Tencent's full acquisition of Riot. They're like complete owners now, so any smaller changes that they were resisting from Tencent's version of the game, they're slowly and quickly making their way into the overall product. You saw that with splash art unification as well. And then Elder Dragon replaces all these elemental dragons after 35 minutes, and it gives bonuses based on the effects of the other dragons that you took before. No more than 3 dragon types can spawn in one game, so that is also something to consider. Rift Herald only spawns one time in the game. It doesn't spawn at 4 minutes, it spawns at 6 minutes now. Does not respawn. Past 20 minutes, the Baron will be there anyway. So the interesting thing to note is that you don't lose this buff when you get Baron. So you could potentially have someone with this buff And then also having Baron buff, because this buff lasts for 20 minutes and it persists through death and cannot be transferred. At 100 charges, your next basic attack discharges all stacks of corruption, dealing 15 to 270 magic damage. Yeah, that's kind of a lot of damage. I think that multiplies the value of hybrid penetration runes, like all the changes overall that they made. If your champion does mixed damage, at least. Buff duration on Baron Nashor is up. That's just to make it so that you can trade objectives and still feel good about it. Red and blue buff are going to be a lot shorter duration after the first clear. The first buff is still worth 120 seconds, which is 2 minutes. And every buff after that is only going to last for a minute and a half. But they are making the buffs a little more powerful in terms of the effects that you'll be able to feel. Red buff will give more health regeneration at later ranks. Now applies a free tick of damage on application or reapplication. Okay. So what that means is when you have a higher attack speed, red buff will be dealing more damage. And the slow percent got increased at max levels, so they made the buffs more powerful and they just don't last as long now. That might also make the Mastery Runic Affinity even more valuable as well, because that'll increase your buff duration. Not only for mid laners and junglers, but maybe certain champions that feel like they're going to get a double buff and they want to hold on to it a bit longer. The biggest change to me is that blue buff won't give flat ability power anymore based on level. It's going to give 15% bonus. So whoever's building the most ability power on your team should probably take the blue buff. If that happens to be your top lane Vlad, then give him the blue buff, because that is a huge increase in damage. And the mana regeneration change, I could really care less about, but it's going to be giving him more mana now. Here's the jungle timer changes that I was just talking about. Respawn icon appears at the campus location on the minimap at 60 seconds before spawn, brightening at 20 seconds. And if you get the full timer still if you clear the buff yourself or if you have vision of it. But everyone will get this 1 minute notification. Turret stats are like functionally going to be tankier because they're getting resistance where they had none before, but champions with penetration will be able to take them down easier as compared to some of their counterparts in the past. The main change to outer and inner turret damage is the heating up damage no longer partially resets when turrets switch targets. So you're not going to be able to tank like 3 tower shots for your teammate and then he tanks one and then somebody else tanks one and then they just keep juggling aggro because the first tower shot doesn't deal a lot of damage. So now it's going to heat up and it's going to continue to deal more damage based on how many times the tower has hit and not who it's hitting. All the rest of this stuff is pretty much functionally the same, so we're going to skip over that. Turret rewards local gold for the outer tower is going to be pretty huge now. It'll be pretty important to get that onto one of your carries, or at least to split it between however many people are around. Global gold went down slightly, so they're just kind of like making it so that each turret gives about 800 gold. Uh, Overall, I think that's a good change. There's probably a little bit too much ambient gold being thrown into the game, so that's pretty good. And this change is to remove buddy junglers. For people that want to steal experience or they want to share experience. Now, uh, jungle monsters only give experience to the killer. Non-epic jungle monsters, that is. And they're actually putting a decent amount more experience onto the jungle items. So the junglers will still have the nice 2-minute buff duration where they can each do a full clear. And then after you get your jungle items, it'll just be like better and better from there. Death timers were reduced between 20 and 35 minutes because they had reduced them between the 20 and 35-minute window already, and that seemed to be doing well, which I'm in agreement with. Death timers were a little bit too long early in the game from previous seasons' iterations. Home guard completely got nerfed, and it's now going to be scaling like everything else. Even at 40 minutes, it's not going to be as good as it was at 20 minutes. So that's pretty big change. And what do you know? There's more champion changes. Like, what a huge patch. What the fuck? Holy shit. Um, I did spend like an hour and a half to 2 hours preparing for this. So if it seems like I have a good understanding of changes and I'm just speaking from like just reading through it at 1 second, it's not actually the case. This basically makes it so that you can't pin people to terrain. Against certain walls, Azir would ult you, and then you couldn't flash because the wall knocks you back over, and you couldn't walk out. You couldn't move at all. So that kind of ability should just be removed. So instead of like removing the ult, they fixed the ultimate. Alawi changes, which I don't really care about. I think that champion is badly designed, but you know, there's 2 Alawi players out there that are gonna hate me for saying that. Q cooldown up while on Wolf's Frenzy. W lasts longer and deals bonus damage to monsters. So this kind of makes Kindred more of like a farm heavy jungler. And Q cooldown will not be as useful for catching people. Because the way it used to work is Q and then like you throw your W down and then your Q's reset it to 2 seconds like early on in the game. And you could just Raffle stomp someone with positioning and extra damage. So that play pattern is going to be heavily nerfed. Kindred's invades will be much weaker as a result, and will be mainly focused on hitting 2 to 3 item power spike, I want to say. The Blood Razor item and Blade of the Ruined King will probably still be decent items. I think probably still CLZL items coming on Kindred. It remains to be seen how strong she's going to be, though. Or they, whatever Kindred wants to be called these days. This Nidalee nerf is focused on her early game damage with her Q. Her ganks were just too good, pretty much. Now her Q takedown damage is going to be based on ranks of her ultimate. So that's going to be like pretty good at making it so she's not so overbearing in the early game. And this is just a bunch of bug fixes for Rengar. Hopefully they got it right this time. Q slow and movement speed down no longer refreshes wind speakers. So I'm not really sure that this was a problem to begin with, but maybe an unintended interaction with her Q that was reapplying wind speaker's blessing, the armor portion. And I just don't think she's going to be that good after Grievous Wounds got changed back. So this champion's kit remains in flux. We'll see what they come up with. I expect her to be bad in this patch after Grievous Wounds is changed and Merlinomicon is buffed. I think she's going to be real bad. Whereas before, when she got really low, she can continue to sustain her allies. Now if you have Merlinomicon on her and she's below 35% health or 30%, you're going to be able to finish her off in about no time flat. Base mana up, mana growth is down, W range is down, E is shorter and narrower, so Taric came out a little bit too strong, I would say. At least in terms of support. This is going to hurt his usability in other lanes the most. I think he'll be about the same for support. But it's a good champion update, I like it. Teemo has more access to traps, basically. His Q mana costs are getting changed. So across the board in champion changes, you're just seeing mana cost adjustments, duration changes, like usability mainly, and bug fixing. Zac is getting straight buffed. His blobs are going to reform faster based on his level. So he's going to have like two health bars for you to melt through pretty much by level 18 if you're not able to kill him in 4 seconds. It won't be like 2 full health bars, but it'll be like however much he regenerates with when he's got 2 or 3 blobs up, which is like 30 to 40% health. Still pretty good. Some splash art fixes, or whatever you want to call it. A few more long-term splash replacements. Ooh, that one's sexy. Removed boot enchantments. So I want to say that this is going to make it so Zeal items are going to be more interesting. Now instead of like having late game boots with your enchantment and then getting an elixir, I might think, well, what would happen if I got Trinity Force instead of boots? Like that kind of thing. So late game builds got more interesting as a result of this. Devourer no longer exists, replaced by Bloodrazor. Bloodrazor deals 3% of the target's maximum health as bonus physical damage, maximum 75 damage versus minions and monsters. That's so that you can't take down Baron ridiculously quick. Ginsu's Rageblade, this is going to be an interesting item for laners now. Where before it was probably a little bit too cheap for the amount of stats it gave out. It's appropriately priced at 3,600 gold now, which is pretty close to the cost of Infinity's Edge. Champions that don't benefit from ability power will probably not like this item as much. It's losing the AoE damage, and it's taking the Sated Devourer passive on maximum 6 stacks. It'll start to trigger on hit effects an additional time. So I want to say that this item is not going to be used that much because it's so expensive, and they're making all the AP items that are alternatives much better and cheaper. So this will probably not be seen very much. Outside of a few abuse cases, maybe like Tryndamere will build this. Tryndamere will probably be really good with this item. The Black Cleaver, cost reduced, and it lost 580. So this is their answer to the tanky meta. They want some of the champions that do well with Black Cleaver, Renekton, Gnar, Riven, etc. To have a little bit more access to the Black Cleaver. Because right now it just is, or previously it seemed like a huge gold sink. And it should probably feel a little bit better in terms of usability. It's almost just like they took a longsword off the item and they said, here you go, 400 gold cheaper. Like, that's exactly what happened. So think of it like that. It lost a longsword that you don't have to buy now. You have access to the passive earlier. Spectre's Cowl has 250 health instead of 200, and losing 5 magic resist. So overall, this is going to be a pretty decent component item just to hold on to. I would say it got better because of like 50 health, but then obviously it got worse because it costs more gold and it gives less magic resist. It's probably not really worth talking about. Banshee's Veil is the bigger change. The cost went down to 2450. So what they want this to be is like functionally your rush item against burst mages or combo mages. Something to that effect. But it's losing quite a bit of health, so you're probably going to purchase Banshees strictly for the spell shield. Spirit Visage is getting a little bit of passive healing increase, and health regeneration is getting straight buffed. Magic resist is going down though. I still wouldn't want to face Rod of Ages and Spirit Visage Maokai in this patch, especially because Warmogs is going to be more useful. I'm not really going to get into Warmogs though. Cost and magic resist reduced. The big thing is that it's 300 gold cheaper, so people will be able to build Guardian Angel at a time when it makes sense. And then after the cooldown is blown, they won't feel as obligated to sell it because it was only 2400 gold to start with. I'm actually wondering how much it's going to resell for now. That's something I'll have to look at in game, but it's not one of the changes that really influence your decision. That's kind of like an auxiliary decision. When you think about the opportunity cost of picking up this item and using it just for the cooldown, it becomes less of a decision point and more of an after effect. Quicksilver Sash and Mercurial Scimitar no longer remove debuffs, they only remove CC. So that removes crowd control. It's probably going to make certain champions a little bit overbearing to deal with, but in terms of overall game health, I like that they're removing the debuff removal, if that makes sense. Hexdrinker, Mob, Melmortius, and Sterak's Gage all give pretty nice shields, so as a result, they're kind of linking them up, kind of like the Hextech line, making them share a unique passive name. So you won't be able to have all these stacks, or you won't be able to have all of these shields triggering and like make these a good thing to build together. They're going to be a lot worse to build together now. But it's only Hexdrinker and Sterak's. The Mob Melmortius purchase is going to remain pretty much the same. Your decision to buy Hexdrinker is what influences whether you purchase Mob Melmortius. But the decision to buy Sterak's and Hexdrinker together, that's just something that they're pretty much removing the combo effectively with that change. So Graves will be a little bit unhappy about that change. Bami's Cinder health is down 20 health. I don't think that's really going to do anything. For anybody that was going to build this before, it's probably going to be about the same. It just won't be as much of a no-brainer. And Sunfire Cape is a little more expensive. That's probably to make it more in line with Randuin's. I think Randuin's would be maybe a slightly better buy now, depending on how much crit chance you're dealing with on the enemy team. Cinderhulk got a lot better. I'm just going to say that I have no idea how the Bloodrazor champions are going to do versus the Cinderhulk junglers, but I can only say that whoever gets the bigger lead early will probably win. Because Bloodrazor champion with an extra item is going to melt someone with just a Cinderhulk, but if somebody's got a Cinderhulk and they've got a completed item up on a Bloodrazor jungler, the extra damage is just going to eat him away before he can do any meaningful damage. So I think this is a healthy change. It remains to be seen if this is going to be skewing competitive play in a way that makes them change it. But I expect the damage per level to go down to about 1.75 per level. That would make more sense to me. Or possibly the base going down as well. We'll see. Vision wards are now 4 health instead of 5, but it can regenerate 1 health every 3 seconds after 5 seconds out of combat. So if you're just juking into a brush to remove a pink ward, that's not going to work anymore because it regenerates health. Blue Trinket nerf, I'll still probably be building this on the carries that would normally get it. You're not going to build it on champions that need sweeper though. Champions that need sweeper probably already didn't build it, but it's going to make the amount of vision lower that teams have access to. Righteous Glory and Warmog's changes are pretty lackluster. Righteous Glory only affects yourself active speed now. It doesn't speed up your allies. It's got the Catalyst passive now because it still builds out a Catalyst of Aeons, the new name for Catalyst the Protector. A bunch of unexciting changes really, but I expect Warmogs to be slightly better because of the cooldown reduction. 50 health getting lost is not really a big thing. And what's huge is actually being able to build Giant's Belt and Kittle Gem. That's a pretty big buff on the Combine. Relic Shield Sustain is being nerfed. The charge cooldown is going down though. So effectively you're going to have access to less sustain. That's basically what it means. Same for Targons, but like not in such an oppressive way. What a lot of supports were doing is tanking like a couple of jungle shots early on and then just going into lane and using your relic shield to proc. You would be full health by the time you wanted to trade. So that's why they're nerfing that in general. But just because this is seen so much and Spell Thieves was seen so much, they're just nerfing both of those a little bit. Grievous Wounds affects all healing now. And that's about it. We made it.